The hall does not have marble floors. It only looks that way until you walk on it, and then it remembers you. 12 steps in, and I have already heard my own footsteps 3 times, echoed back from somewhere beneath the stone, a fraction of a second late, as if the floor is still deciding whether to believe I am real. I count them. 1, 2, 3. It is easier than counting the eyes on me instead. The throne room of Emperor Vale Korath stretches longer than any cathedral I have stood in, and I have stood in most of the famous ones, usually for funerals. The ceiling rises into a haze of pale light that has no visible source. The columns are not stone. They are something that used to be alive, polished into stillness, and I do not ask what. The guards stop me 40 feet from the throne. That is the mercy distance, I am told later, close enough to address him, far enough that he never has to lower his voice to be heard. Emperor Vale Korath does not stand to greet me. Few things make him stand. He is broad in the way mountains are broad, draped in fabric the color of old wine, though I am almost certain that is decoration and not commentary. Beside him, a thin figure in silver robes watches me with the patience of someone who has already decided how this conversation ends. I will learn her name within the hour. Sela Vantris. For now she is just the woman who has not blinked since I walked in. Ambassador, the Emperor says, and the word comes out heavy, like he is setting down something he has carried a long way. You stand where 17 species have stood before surrendering their worlds to the Calyx dominion. I let the floor finish replaying my last footstep before I answer. 17, I say. That's a lot of floors to remember. A few of the court members shift, the kind of small motion people make when they are not sure if they are allowed to be amused. The Emperor is not amused. Your fleet is 6 days from being a memory, he says. Your colonies, your stations, your home world. None of it will need defending, because there will be nothing left worth defending it from. I am offering you something rare, a clean surrender. No further loss. Your species continues, under our terms, under our law. And if we say no, then there will be nothing clean about it. I let that sit in the room for a moment, the way you let a bruise finish forming before you decide how much it hurts. How long do I have to answer? I ask. 48 hours, he says. After that, the offer becomes irrelevant, and so does this conversation. 48 hours. I do the math without meaning to. 2,880 minutes. I have spent longer than that waiting for a hospital report. I have spent longer than that waiting for a knock that never came. I do not say either of those things. That's very generous of you, I say instead. Most empires don't bother with a clock. They just start. I am not most empires. No, I agree, you're not. Sela Vantris tilts her head a fraction, the way a bird recalculates the size of something it thought was easy prey. The court is full of species I do not recognize, dozens of delegations standing in tiered rows along the walls, here to watch the latest world fall in line. Some of them look at me with something close to pity. A few watch with open hunger, the kind that comes from finally not being the smallest thing in the room. I find I am not particularly interested in either reaction. What interests me is a small chip in the gold trim along the base of the throne, no bigger than a thumbnail, where the metal has been worn down to something duller underneath. Someone has stood here and shifted their weight, again and again, for years, maybe centuries. Even an empire this large has nervous habits it cannot polish away. You haven't asked your fleet commander to leave the room, the Emperor says, watching me watch the throne. Most ambassadors request privacy before they discuss terms. I'm not discussing terms, I say. I'm listening to yours. Beside the dais, a broad officer in dark plating shifts his weight, jaw tight. I will learn his name too. General Dre Solon, commander of the Dominion fleet, the man whose ships are supposed to make my answer simple. He does not like that I have not looked at him yet. And what will Earth's answer be? The Emperor asks. I think about the people who are not in this room. Daniel, somewhere behind a dozen layers of static and distance, listening through a channel that should not exist according to anyone watching us. Lucy, 3 systems away, already moving pieces across a board this Emperor does not know is being played. Henry, back on a world that has spent the last 2 days pretending everything is normal, because that is what you do until it isn't. I think about the things that get said in 2 minutes, and the things that take 2 years to finish saying. You'll have it within your 48 hours, I tell him. I wouldn't want to be rude. The Emperor studies me, the way you study weather, that refuses to match the forecast. You're very calm, Ambassador, for someone who has just been told her world will end. I let myself smile then. Not wide, not for show. The kind of smile that happens because some part of you has already done the arithmetic, and the numbers came out strange. I've stood on worse floors than this one, I say. Nobody in that hall understands what I mean. That is fine. I did not say it for them. The guards step forward to escort me out. before I have decided to leave. Sela Vantris does not move from the Emperor's side, but her eyes follow me the whole way to the doors, the same patient, unblinking attention she gave me when I arrived. Except now there is a question folded into it that was not there before. The doors close behind me with a sound like the floor itself exhaling. I count the seconds until they seal. 6. It is the first number all day that comes out exactly the way I expect it to. The corridor outside the throne room is narrower than I expect, lit by strips of cold white set into the ceiling, and a pair of guards fall into step on either side of me without a word. Neither of them looks at me. I have noticed that about the Dominion already. The ones who serve it directly never look at the species they are about to conquer. It is easier that way, I imagine. Easier to keep dragging the boot down on a neck you have never had to see. I touch the small pin at my collar, the one shaped like an old fountain symbol, the one the Dominion scanners cleared 3 separate times before I boarded their shuttle. It is not decoration. You there, I say quietly, not moving my lips more than I have to. Static. Then a voice, thin and steady, threading itself directly into the bone behind my ear. I'm here, Daniel says. We caught the whole thing. 48 hours. 48 hours, I confirm. That's not much room. It's exactly the room we asked for. A pause on his end, the kind that means he is doing the same math I just did. 2,880 minutes. Except his version of that number means something different. His version means ships, and routes, and 100 small promises that all have to land before the clock runs out. Lucy's already moving, he says. First contact window opens in 6 hours. Good. Mara. His voice changes register, just slightly, the way it does when he is asking the question underneath the question. Are you all right in there? I look down the corridor, at the guards who will not look at me, at the cold light that makes everyone's skin the same shade of nothing. I'm fine, I say, which is true the way most useful things are true, by leaving out the parts that would only complicate the answer. We reach a set of chambers near the edge of the palace, rooms set aside for visiting dignitaries who are not yet conquered, the kind of hospitality that exists purely so the Dominion can say, later, that it offered hospitality. The door seals behind me with the same exhaling sound as the throne room. I am alone for the first time since I stepped off the shuttle. I sit on the edge of the bed, which is too firm, built for a body heavier than mine, and I look at my hands for a moment longer than I need to. 2,880 minutes. I have done harder math under worse pressure. I just have never done it with an entire species on the other side of the equal sign. The room hums, the low frequency of something always listening. I do not bother looking for the device. I assume there are several. I lie back instead, staring at a ceiling the color of nothing. And somewhere behind my own ribs a small, stubborn thing settles into place. The same thing that settled into place the day I stood outside a relocation tent at age 9 and decided that fear was a tool other people got to use, not me. 48 hours. I close my eyes and start counting them down, one by one, the way I have counted everything that ever mattered. Sela Vantris comes to my chamber 4 hours later, alone, which I am told later is unusual. Advisors to the Emperor do not typically walk anywhere alone. They are accompanied the way important documents are accompanied, by people whose job it is to make sure nothing happens to them. She does not knock, the door simply opens, and she is standing in it, silver robes catching the cold light in a way that makes her look like something poured rather than dressed. You haven't eaten, she says, which is not a greeting, more an observation filed for later use. I wasn't aware that was a condition of surrender. It isn't. She steps inside, and the door seals behind her with that same exhale. I find it tells me things, what a person does with the hours they think might be their last. And what does it tell you? That I haven't eaten. That you're not afraid in the way I expected. I do not answer right away. I let her sit with the silence the way she let the court sit with mine. She moves toward the small table near the window, the one piece of furniture in the room that looks like it was built for a body my size rather than the Emperor's. She runs one finger along its edge, the same idle gesture I noticed at the throne, a habit so old it has worn its own groove into the metal underneath. Your fleet commander, she says, the man you speak to through a channel that shouldn't exist on Dominion frequencies. Does he have a name? So they know about the pin. Of course they know about the pin. I never expected otherwise. Daniel, I say, because there is no reason to lie about something so small, and small honest things make the larger ones easier to hide. Daniel, she repeats, testing the shape of it. And what is Daniel doing for you right now, Ambassador, while you sit in this room not eating? Probably worrying. He does that well. That's not what I asked. It's what I'm answering. Something close to a smile moves across her face, gone before it fully arrives, the way light passes over water without staying. You remind me of someone, she says, I get that a lot. No. She turns to look at me directly for the first time since she entered. I mean it specifically. There was a delegate, 3 centuries ago, from a world called Ardeni. Small place, proud place. He stood in that same hall and was offered the same 48 hours, and he wept, and he begged, and the emperor granted him an extra day out of something almost like mercy. What happened to his world? It became the most profitable tributary system in the Dominion. Its people have served faithfully ever since. Faithfully, I repeat. That's an interesting word for it. What word would you use? I think about my answer longer than I need to, not because I am unsure, but because I want her to watch me think about it. Patient, I say finally. There's a difference. Alphantris. Celavantris studies me the way a jeweler studies a stone she suspects is not what it claims to be, and for a moment, neither of us says anything, and the silence does more work than either of our sentences managed. You haven't asked about your fleet's chances, she says. Most species, in your position, want to know the odds before they decide anything. I already know the odds. Do you? 48 hours. Against an empire that's been collecting tributary worlds for 3 centuries. The math isn't complicated. And yet you smiled at the emperor. I think of the chip in the gold trim, worn smooth by years of someone shifting their weight on a throne they were never quite comfortable sitting in. I think of 17 species standing exactly where I stood. I think of how many of them must have done the same math I just did, out loud, in front of a court built to enjoy watching them arrive at despair. I smiled, I say, because the math isn't the part that worries me. Celavantris waits for me to finish the thought. I do not finish it. Some things are worth more held back than spent. She leaves without saying goodbye, the door exhaling shut behind her, and I sit alone again, in a room built for a body bigger than mine, turning over the conversation the way you turn over a stone to see what's living underneath it. My hand finds the pin at my collar again. You heard that, I say quietly. All of it, Daniel answers. She's good. Careful. She didn't ask anything she didn't already half know the answer to. That's how you find out the half she's missing. Lucy says the Ardeni system just came online for contact. First response window in 9 minutes. Ardeni. The same world Celavantris mentioned. The same proud little place that wept and begged 3 centuries ago, and was rewarded with 3 centuries of faithful service. I did not choose that world by accident. None of the worlds on Lucy's list were chosen by accident. We spent 4 months building that list before I ever set foot on a Dominion shuttle. 4 months of quiet conversations in places the Emperor's intelligence network was never built to watch, because nobody in 300 years had bothered listening to what the small, faithful, profitable worlds actually wanted. It turns out what they wanted, mostly, was someone to ask. Tell Lucy I want the Ardeni response the moment it lands, I say. Whatever it says. You think they'll answer? I look at the ceiling the color of nothing, and somewhere behind my ribs that same stubborn thing from the relocation tent settles a little deeper into place. They wept and begged for an extra day 3 centuries ago, I say. I think a species capable of that kind of hope hasn't actually run out of it. I think it's just been waiting for a better offer. The hours move differently when you are counting them on purpose. I have learned this before. In places I do not talk about. Waiting rooms and transit stations and the long quiet stretch between a question and an answer that might change everything. Time does not slow down or speed up. It simply becomes very, very visible, every minute arriving one at a time instead of blurring into the next, and you start to notice things about yourself you usually let pass unnoticed. I notice that I keep glancing at the chip in the table's edge where Celavantris rested her finger, the small worn groove in the metal. I notice I am doing it the way I once noticed myself counting ceiling tiles in a hospital corridor. Fixing on something small and irrelevant because the large thing in the room is too heavy to look at directly. The large thing in this room is not fear. I want to be precise about that, even with myself, especially with myself. The large thing is the weight of every person back on Earth who does not know yet that their survival is currently being negotiated by a woman sitting alone in a chamber built for a bigger species, staring at a groove in a table. My comm pin warms against my collar. Mara. Daniel's voice again, different now, faster. Ardeni responded. And? They want terms. Real terms. Not a rescue, not protection, just trade on equal footing. The kind they haven't had since before the Dominion took them in. Lucy's drafting now. Something in my chest loosens, just slightly, the way a knot loosens when you find the right thread to pull, instead of pulling all of them at once. That's 1, I say. That's 1, he agrees. 41 to go, if we're being thorough. We're being thorough. I do not smile this time. I do not need to. The thing inside me that smiled at the Emperor was never really about him. It was about this exact moment. The first thread coming loose. Proof that the math I had been doing in private for 4 months was not the comforting fiction of a desperate woman, but an actual hole in a wall 3 centuries thick. Outside my window, through glass that distorts the light into something faintly green, I can see a sliver of the Dominion sky, ships moving in slow formation between towers that scrape too high to be anything but a message. Look how much we have built. Look how little you have left to refuse with. I look at it for a long moment, and then I stop looking, because there is other work to do, and because some messages are not worth the courtesy of being received the way they were sent. Get me the next 9 on the list, I tell Daniel. We have 44 hours left, and Celavantris already suspects there's more going on here than a frightened ambassador stalling for time. You think she'll tell the Emperor? I think of the way she watched me, the patient, unblinking attention, the small, ungiven smile. Not yet, I say. I think she wants to know what she's looking at first. People like her don't report half a picture. They wait until they're sure. And when she's sure, I look back at the worn groove in the table, the one made by someone who stood in this exact spot, shifting their weight, for longer than is comfortable to imagine. By the time she's sure, I say, it won't matter what she tells him. General Dre Solon does not sleep during the 48 hours. He has not slept properly in years, not since the rank was given to him along with the weight that comes attached to it. But tonight is different in a way he cannot name yet, only feel, the way a sailor feels weather before the instruments confirm it. The war room beneath the palace is a long oval chamber, its walls covered in slow-moving light that maps the edges of the Dominion's territory, hundreds of systems glowing faint amber, tributary worlds rendered in a softer gold. He has stood in this room for most of his adult life. He knows its light the way other men know a familiar face. Tonight, 3 of the gold systems are not glowing the way they should. Run it again, he tells the technician at the console, a young man named Vask who has not yet learned to hide his nerves from a superior officer. I've run it 4 times, sir. Ardenai isn't reporting in. Neither is Mureth Outpost 7, neither is the relay station at Solvith's Edge. Reporting in is not the same as gone. No, sir, but all 3 went quiet within an hour of each other, and that's never happened before. Not once. Not in the 11 years I've worked this console. Dre Solon looks at the 3 dim gold lights among the hundreds of bright ones, and something in his chest tightens, the particular tightness of a man who has spent his whole career trusting a system and is now watching, for the first time, the system fail to answer a simple question. Could be a relay fault, he says, mostly to himself. Could be, Vask agrees, in the tone of a man who does not believe it either. 3 systems is nothing, in an empire of hundreds. Dre Solon tells himself this twice before he leaves the war room, and he almost believes it the second time. He does not yet know that by morning, 3 will be 11. On Ardenai, in a council chamber built from pale local stone that has never once been mistaken for anything grander than what it is, a woman named UL Brask stands before her people's governing circle, and reads aloud the terms Lucy Bennett's office transmitted 6 hours earlier. Equal trade, no tribute, no garrison. A formal acknowledgement, in writing, witnessed by 3 other Dominion tributary worlds, that the old debt Ardenai has spent 3 centuries repaying, was settled in full over 100 years ago, and that everything paid since has been collected under terms Ardenai never actually agreed to, only surrendered to. The chamber is silent for a long moment after she finishes. An elder near the back, old enough to remember stories of the original surrender passed down from a grandmother who was a child during it, finally speaks. And if we say yes, what happens to us when the Dominion's fleet finds out? The offer includes defense guarantees, UL says. Earth's terms, not ours. We didn't ask for them. They offered them anyway. Why would a species we've never met offer to defend a world it's never seen? UL Brask thinks of the message that arrived with the terms, brief, almost plain, nothing like the grand language the Dominion uses when it wants something. It said simply that a world which has spent 3 centuries paying for a debt it never owed, deserves better than another empire deciding its fate from a distance. Because, she says, I think they understand what it's like to be told the math isn't on your side. The vote is not close. At Meridian Station, Lucy Bennett has not left the operations deck in over 30 hours, and the dark circles beneath her eyes have started to look less like exhaustion and more like permanent architecture. The wall before her is covered in names, worlds, response times, a constellation only she and a handful of analysts fully understand. Solvith's Edge just confirmed, calls a voice from across the deck. A young woman named Priya whose voice has gone hoarse from 20 hours of relaying updates. That's 9. 9 confirmed, 4 still deciding, 2 declined, Lucy says, more to herself than anyone. The way you talk to a problem you are still solving, even while reporting its current state. Get me the projections on the decline too. I want to know if it's principle or fear. Does it matter which? Lucy looks up from the wall of names for the first time in several minutes, and something tired but entirely certain moves across her face. It always matters which, she says. Fear we can work with. Principle, we respect, and we move on. Captain Owen Hale's voice cuts through the deck's low hum, relayed from the Halcyon, currently holding position at the edge of Dominion sensor range, close enough to matter, far enough to claim it isn't there if anyone asks. Lucy, I've got movement. 3 Dominion patrol ships changed heading 40 minutes ago. They're not coming toward us, they're moving toward Ardeni. The room goes very still. Confirm that's not standard patrol rotation, Lucy says, and her voice has lost every trace of the exhaustion it carried 30 seconds earlier. Confirmed. This isn't rotation. This is response. Lucy closes her eyes for exactly 1 second, the only second she allows herself, and then she is already moving toward the comm relay, already calling for the encrypted channel that reaches a small pin clipped to a collar 3 systems away, inside a palace built by an empire that has just started, for the first time in 3 centuries, to notice something cracking beneath its own floor. Mara. Daniel's voice arrives in my ear sharper than it has all day. Dominion patrol ships are moving on Ardeni. 3 vessels, no declared cause. I am standing at the window of my chamber when the words land, watching the slow formation of ships scrape across a green-tinted sky, and for the first time since I stepped off the shuttle, the stubborn thing behind my ribs goes very quiet and very cold. Are they armed for engagement? Standard patrol loadout. Could be intimidation. Could be worse. I think about UL Brask, a name I have never spoken aloud to anyone, a woman I have never met, who somewhere on a small proud world built of pale stone just signed her people's name to a future none of us can fully guarantee yet. Get me Ardeni's channel, I say. Mara, if you contact them directly right now, and the Dominion is monitoring traffic. I know what I'm asking, Daniel. A pause, the kind he only allows himself when he has already decided to do what I asked, and is simply giving himself 1 more second to hope I'll change my mind. Channels open. UL Brask. I do not know if that is the correct way to address her. I do it anyway, because formality is a luxury for situations with more time in them than this one has. This is Mara Whitfield. I understand patrol ships are moving toward your system. The voice that answers is steady in a way that tells me everything about the kind of person who can read terms like the ones we sent and not flinch. They are. We see them on approach. Do you want to reconsider the terms? There is a pause, not long, but long enough that I count it. 3 seconds. No, she says. We've reconsidered for 300 years. We're done reconsidering. Something in my chest, the cold, quiet thing, warms by exactly 1 degree. Then hold your position, I say. Don't engage, don't run, let them see you standing there. And if they fire? I look out at the green-tinted sky, at the slow formation of Dominion ships that have never once had to imagine a world saying no to them, and I think about every floor I have stood on, that was built to make me feel smaller than I am. They won't, I say, with more certainty than I currently have any right to. Not yet. Not before the Emperor knows exactly what he's firing at. I am wrong about very little that day. I am wrong, slightly, about this. The patrol commander above Ardeni, a mid-ranking officer named Corrist Vale, no relation to the Emperor despite the shared syllables, receives no order to fire, because General Dre Saloon, 3 systems away in a war room full of dimming gold lights, has not yet decided what this situation even is. Intimidation is the order given. Intimidation is what Corrist Vale executes, 3 ships holding position above a world too small to matter, in theory, broadcasting nothing but presence. It is enough to terrify a population that has feared exactly this moment for 3 centuries. It is not enough to make them take the vote back. By the time the sun rises over Ardeni's pale stone capital, the council chamber has confirmed its decision a second time, formally, on record, broadcast openly across every channel the Dominion's own monitoring stations are listening to. They want every tributary world watching to hear it. 3 centuries of debt, repaid. Terms accepted. Allegiance, ended. In the war room beneath the palace, Dre Saloon watches the broadcast arrive on every screen at once, and for the first time in 11 years of trusting the slow amber light of his maps, he understands that the maps have already changed and the light simply has not caught up yet. Get me the Emperor, he says, and his voice does not sound like a general's voice anymore. It sounds, for just a moment, like a man checking a door he was certain was locked, and finding the handle turns. Selah Vantris is the one who actually delivers the news, because that has always been her function. the soft hand that carries hard information to a man who does not respond well to hearing it directly. She finds the Emperor in his private study, a room smaller than the throne hall but no less heavy, walls lined with the recovered relics of conquered worlds, trophies arranged with the precise care of a man who needs to be reminded, regularly, of every world he has already won. Ardeni has formally severed its allegiance, she says, broadcast openly. Every tributary world within range heard it. The Emperor does not look up from the relic in his hands, a small carved figure from a world whose name he no longer remembers without checking. One world, he says, a small one. It changes nothing. Solvith's edge severed 11 hours ago. Myrith Outpost confirmed 9 hours before that. 4 others are in active deliberation, and early reports suggest they are leaning the same direction. The carved figure stops turning in his hands. Explain. Earth's ambassador has been in quiet contact with tributary leadership for months, possibly longer, before she ever boarded the shuttle to stand in your hall. The 48 hours you offered her was never a deadline she needed. It was a deadline you needed, to feel like you were the one setting the terms. The Emperor sets the relic down with a care that does not match the stillness moving across the rest of his body, the specific, dangerous stillness of a man recalculating an entire reign in real time. And the human ambassador, he says slowly, she knew this would happen. While she stood in my hall and smiled. I believe, Selavantris says, choosing her next words the way a person chooses footing on ice, that the smile was the only honest thing she said to you all day. The Emperor is quiet for a long moment, long enough that the room's low hum becomes the loudest thing in it. Bring her back to the hall, he says finally. I want to hear, from her own mouth, exactly how long she has been laughing at me. She wasn't laughing, my lord. No? No. Selavantris glances toward the window, toward the slow formation of ships still scraping across a sky that, for the first time in 3 centuries, looks less like a message and more like a question nobody asked permission to ask. I think it was worse than that. I think she simply already knew. The guards come for me 20 hours before the deadline I was given, which tells me everything I need to know about how the conversation in that study must have gone. I am ready for them. I have been ready since the moment Daniel told me Ardeni's broadcast went out openly across every channel the Dominion monitors, because an open broadcast was never an accident. We wanted the Emperor to find out exactly this way, fast, loud, impossible to soften before it reached him. The throne hall feels different the second time. The light has not changed, the columns have not moved, but the silence has a different texture now, less like patience and more like a held breath. Emperor Vale Korath is standing this time. I told you before that few things make him stand. I was right. 48 hours, he says, before I have crossed half the distance to the dais. I gave you 48 hours, Ambassador, as a courtesy, as mercy, and you spent it tearing pieces off the foundation of an empire 3 centuries old. I spent it listening, I say, same as you asked. Do not. His voice does not rise. That is somehow worse than if it had. Do not stand in my hall and tell me you were listening, while 11 tributary worlds severed their allegiance behind my back. While my own general's maps went dark one light at a time and nobody thought to tell me until it was already done. General Dre Saloon stands near the dais, jaw tighter than it was the last time I saw him, and for the first time since I arrived in this hall, he looks directly at me. There is no anger in it, not exactly. There is something closer to recognition. The look of a man realizing the battlefield he trained his whole life for was never the one he ended up fighting on. You never had 11 worlds, I say. You had 11 worlds that were afraid to say no. There's a difference, and I think somewhere underneath all that gold trim, you've always known it. Careful, Ambassador. I've been careful for 4 months, I say. I'm done being careful for the next 60 seconds. Selavantris, standing slightly apart from the throne now, watches me with an expression I cannot fully name, something between admiration and grief. The look of a person watching a wall they helped build come down, and finding they are not entirely sorry to see it go. You told me the first day I stood here that 17 species had surrendered on this floor before me, I say. I believed you. I still believe you. What I don't believe is that any of them actually wanted to. I think they did the math the way I did the math, and the math told them resistance meant losing everything, so they chose the version of losing that let them keep breathing. That is the nature of empire, the Emperor says. It has always been the nature of empire. Maybe. But empire isn't actually built on fleets, Emperor Korath. I learned that a long time ago, somewhere you've never had to stand. Empire is built on the story that resistance is impossible. The fleets are just there to make the story convincing. And you think you've broken the story. I think, I say, that I offered 11 worlds a different one, and they chose it, freely, on the record. broadcast loud enough for every other tributary world to hear exactly how it sounded when someone finally asked them what they wanted, instead of telling them what they owed. The hall is utterly silent now. Even the floor seems to have stopped replaying footsteps, as if it too is waiting to see what happens next. You think this saves your world, the Emperor says. 11 small systems choosing independence does not stop a fleet 6 days from your home, Ambassador. I can still burn everything you love and call it justice for what you've done here today. I think, for exactly 1 second, about the relocation camps. About the sound a transport makes when it is full of people who have lost everything and are trying very hard not to make that sound out loud. About a version of myself, 9 years old, standing outside a tent, deciding that fear was a tool other people got to use. I do not say any of that. Some things are worth more held back than spent, even now. Especially now. You could, I say instead. You absolutely could. Nobody here is pretending your fleet isn't real. But Emperor, I need you to actually hear the next part, because I don't think anyone said it to you plainly in 300 years. I let the silence stretch 1 beat longer than is comfortable. Your fleet runs on fuel mined in tributary systems. Your shipyards run on labor, contracted from tributary worlds. Your supply lines, your relay stations, your communications grid, every piece of the machine that lets you threaten to burn my home, all of it depends on worlds you've spent 3 centuries convincing they have no other option. They have no other option. They have one now. I let that land the way you let a stone land at the bottom of a well, waiting to hear how deep it actually goes. 11 worlds said no to you in the last 20 hours, I continue. 4 more are deciding right now, while we stand here. By the time your fleet reaches Earth, Emperor, I don't think it matters whether you win that fight, because I don't think you'll have the fuel, the labor, or the supply lines left to make winning mean anything. You can burn my home. You'll be burning it with whatever you've got left in the tank when you arrive, and not 1 drop more, because the worlds that used to refill it have finally noticed they were never actually required to. The Dre Saloon's jaw works once, the small motion of a man doing math he very badly does not want to be doing in front of his Emperor. Is this true? The Emperor asks him, and his voice has gone very quiet. Fuel allocation from Myreth Outpost was already delayed before the severance, Dre Saloon says, each word costing him something. We assumed it was a relay fault. If Solvet's Edge and Ardenai both fall through as well, our 6-day projection to Earth becomes closer to 14, and that's before accounting for what happens if the 4 undecided worlds follow the same pattern. The Emperor looks, for the first time since I entered the hall, less like a mountain and more like a man standing on ground that has just confirmed it is not as solid as he believed. You did all of this, he says slowly, without firing a single weapon. I count exits, I say. I always have. It's not a particularly heroic skill. It just means that when I walked into your hall the first time, I already knew where every door in this fight actually was, and I knew you'd spent 3 centuries assuming nobody would ever bother looking. Sayla Vantris steps forward slightly, the first time she has moved on her own initiative since I arrived. My lord, she says, if I may. The Emperor does not answer her, which she seems to take as permission. I warned you 4 months ago that something had changed in the tributary correspondence patterns, increased traffic to worlds outside the usual diplomatic channels. You told me it was beneath your attention. I believe, she says, choosing the words with visible care, that it has earned a different category of attention now. The Emperor turns the carved relic he is somehow still holding, the one from his study, over once in his hand. The same idle motion I noticed at the throne and again at the table in my chamber. It occurs to me, watching him do it now, surrounded by a court that has gone very quiet and very still, that this is simply what fear looks like on a man who has never before had reason to recognize it in himself. What do you want, Ambassador? He says finally. You did not come here only to dismantle 3 centuries of tributary structure out of spite. There is a request underneath this. There always is. I look at him for a long moment, and somewhere behind my ribs, the stubborn thing that has carried me through this entire 48 hours goes very still, the way it does right before something true finally gets said out loud. I'll tell you exactly what I want, I say, but not standing here, with a clock you set still running over my head. You wanted 48 hours to feel like you were the one in control of this conversation. I think it's time we both admitted that clock stopped mattering somewhere around hour 20. The Emperor sets the relic down. This time his hand is not entirely steady. Then say it, he says. Say what you actually came here to say. I take 1 step closer, close enough now that the mercy distance no longer applies, close enough that for the first time since I arrived, nobody in this hall is entirely sure whose floor we are standing on. Tomorrow, I say. When this is finished, I'll tell you everything. Right now, I think you should spend the next few hours finding out exactly how many more worlds are listening. The Emperor does not sleep that night, and neither do I, though for very different reasons. He spends his hours in the war room beside General Dre Solon, watching gold lights dim one by one across a map he has never had to watch dim before. I spend mine in my chamber, listening to Daniel's voice arrive in pieces, each piece another small proof that the 4 months of quiet work Lucy and I built in places nobody thought to watch were not, in the end, a desperate gamble. They were simply patient. By the time the doors of the throne hall open for me a third time, 16 tributary worlds have formally severed their allegiance. 6 more remain in active deliberation. Not one has chosen to stay silent, and I think that detail matters more than any of the numbers, because silence was always the Dominion's preferred condition, and for the first time in 3 centuries, nobody seems willing to give it to them. The hall is different this morning. Fewer delegations line the tiered walls. Word travels fast in a court built on the appearance of unshakable order, and order, it turns out, is the easiest thing in the universe to shake once people understand it was never as solid as it looked. Emperor Vale Korath is seated again, but he does not look settled into the throne the way he did the first time I stood here. He looks like a man sitting carefully, the way you sit in a chair you are no longer entirely sure will hold your weight. "You said you would tell me what you want," he says, without preamble, without the heavy ceremonial weight he carried into our first conversation. "I am listening, Ambassador. I find I no longer have the luxury of not listening." I look around the hall, at Sela Vantris standing closer to the foot of the dais than she did before, at Dre Saloon with dark circles beneath his eyes that match the ones I imagine sit beneath mine, at the handful of remaining delegations watching with an attention that has shifted, subtly, from fear to something closer to curiosity. "I don't want your throne," I say. "I want to be very clear about that, because I think it's the assumption sitting underneath every question you're about to ask me. Earth doesn't want to rule the Calyx Dominion. We don't want your territory, your shipyards, your relics, or your throne room with its floor that remembers everything except how to forget a debt that was already paid." Then what? I want what Ardeni got, what Solveth's Edge got, what every world on that list got, the moment they were finally asked instead of told. I let the words land slowly, deliberately, because some sentences deserve the full weight of the silence around them. I want Earth recognized as independent, permanently, in writing, witnessed by every tributary world currently reconsidering its position. No tribute, no garrison, no clock ticking down to a 48-hour deadline disguised as generosity. And if I refuse, then you'll spend the next year watching the rest of your tributary worlds do exactly what these 16 did, except this time they'll be doing it with proof that it worked, that a small species with no empire of its own stood in your hall and walked out with everything it asked for, while you sat there and let it happen, because you had nothing left to threaten anyone with, that they hadn't already learned to live without fearing. Dre Saloon shifts beside the throne, and for a moment I think he might object, might reach for the old language of empire, fleets and consequence and the simple math of force. He does not. He has spent the last day watching his own maps confirm, one gold light at a time, that the math changed long before he noticed. "You could have asked for more," Sela Vantris says quietly, almost to herself, though the whole hall hears it. "Reparations, territory, a formal apology, broadcast as widely as the surrender demand was meant to be. You had the leverage for all of it." "I know. Why didn't you?" I think about this question longer than any other one asked of me in this hall, because it deserves an honest answer, and honest answers are rarer in rooms like this than anyone admits. Because the version of justice that just keeps taking more, the moment it has the power to, is the same machine that built this throne room in the first place, I say. I didn't come here to become what we just spent 4 months helping 11 worlds stop being afraid of. I came here to make sure Earth never has to stand where Ardeni stood 3 centuries ago. That's the whole ask. It was always the whole ask. The Emperor is quiet for a long moment, his hands resting on the arms of a throne that has, somewhere in the last hour, become too large for the man sitting in it. "You understand," he says finally, "that what you have done here will not stop with 16 worlds. Once it is known that the Dominion can be made to bend, others will test it, others will ask for more than independence. Some will ask with weapons instead of words." "Probably," I say. "That's not really my problem to solve for you, Emperor. I think, somewhere underneath all of this, you already know that an empire which only holds together through fear was never actually stable to begin with. I didn't break something solid. I think I just removed the last reason everyone had to keep pretending it was." He does not argue with that. I notice he does not argue with that. "The terms," he says. "Put them in writing. I will sign them before the day is finished." "Witnessed by Ardeni, Solveth's Edge, and Mireth Outpost," I add. "I want this signed in front of the same worlds who proved it was possible. You don't trust my word alone." I don't think anyone in this hall does anymore, I say, not unkindly. That's not an insult, Emperor. That's simply what happens when an empire spends 3 centuries asking for trust it never bothered earning. There is a long silence after that, the kind that used to feel dangerous to me the first day I stood in this hall, and now simply feels like the natural shape of a conversation finally being honest with itself. Then it will be witnessed, he says. Sela, see it done. Sela Vantress inclines her head, and for just a moment, before she turns to carry out the order, her eyes meet mine, and something passes between us that has no easy name. Not friendship, not quite respect either, not yet. Something closer to the recognition 2 people share after surviving the same storm from opposite sides of it. The signing happens 4 hours later, in a smaller chamber near the edge of the palace, far less grand than the throne hall, lit by ordinary light instead of the haze of unexplained gold. Representatives from Ardenai, Solvit's Edge, and Mirith Outpost stand as witnesses, their presence alone a kind of quiet miracle. 3 worlds that spent 3 centuries being told their voices did not matter, now standing close enough to watch an emperor's hand shake, almost imperceptibly, as he signs a document that erases the very foundation his empire was built on. I do not gloat. I want to be honest about that too, because it would be easy to gloat, and I think gloating would undo something important about what just happened here. I simply watch, and I count the seconds it takes for the ink to dry, and somewhere behind my ribs, the stubborn thing that carried me through every hour of this is finally, quietly, allowed to rest. Daniel's voice arrives in my ear as the last signature lands. Mara, it's done. It's actually done. It's done. I agree. Henry wants to know if you're coming home. I think about home, about a world that has spent the last 2 days pretending everything was normal, because that is what you do until it isn't, and is about to wake up to the news that it no longer has to pretend. Tell him I'm coming home, I say. Tell him to put the kettle on. I've had a very long 48 hours. I walk out of the palace alone. No guards on either side of me this time, through corridors that no longer feel narrow, past delegations who watch me now with an attention that has nothing left of pity or hunger in it, only the careful curiosity of species recalculating what is actually possible. The throne hall's great doors are visible from the courtyard outside, and as I pass beneath them one last time, the floor beneath my feet does what it has always done, replaying my footsteps a fraction of a second late, as if it is still deciding whether to believe I am real. This time, though, it is not only my footsteps it replays, somewhere underneath the echo, faint, layered, impossible to separate fully from my own. I hear other footsteps too, the ones of every species that has stood on this floor before me, the ones who wept, who begged, who chose the version of losing that let them keep breathing. The floor remembers all of it now, not just the surrenders, the refusals too. I step out into the open air of a world that is not my own, beneath a sky the color of something I do not yet have a word for, and I stop, just for a moment, to breathe it in. I count the seconds until the great doors seal behind me. 6, same as before. For the first time since this entire journey began, I am not counting because I am bracing for what comes next. I am simply counting because it is a number I finally like the shape of. Behind me, the empire that ordered my world to surrender sits in its hall, its floor full of new echoes it never asked for and cannot now unhear. Ahead of me, a transport waits to carry me home, to a world that does not yet know how close it came, and does not yet know it never has to find out the hard way. I smile again, the same smile I gave the Emperor on the first day, except this time there is no court to misunderstand it, no throne to aim it at, no clock running down over my head. This time, it is only for me. And that, I think, walking toward the ship that will carry me home, is exactly how it should be.